Which food delivery app do you use? Swiggy or Zomato? I'm sure you have a clear answer and a clear preference. But if I ask you why you pick one over the other, you would probably struggle to answer. So what drives user preference? Is it just random chance? They just started using one app and then just stuck to it out of habit? Or is there something deeper driving their preference and loyalty? I'm Saurabh, and I'm going to answer a few of these questions today on this episode of Digital Strategy Showdown, where we pit two competitors together and unpack the UX strategies to see which one is driving more business success. This showdown between Swiggy and Zomato will feature 4 variables of comparison and 4 rounds of battle. The first round will be about cognitive load. How much load do you experience mentally, and which one actually lowers that load for you? The second is discoverability. Which app does a better job of actually showing you restaurant options, food options? Third variable is desirability. Which app makes the food look more enticing, stimulates appetite, and allows you to make decisions about which food to pick faster? The fourth variable of comparison is immersion. Which app does a better job telling you a better story of the food, how it's prepared, how it's plated, how it's served, gets you closer to the restaurant before the food actually arrives at your doorstep? So let the battle begin. Okay, let's start round 1 and compare both apps on cognitive load. If you just compare maybe just the restaurant listing page. Okay, that's a really important page. That's a page everybody lands on. I think that will give you a good sense of which one is creating more cognitive load versus the other. But what variable impacts cognitive load? There are many, but if I had to pick one which really makes a big difference, it's an element called white space. Essentially, how much space do you leave empty around all the visual elements? Why is this important? Because it actually reduces clutter, makes it easy for people to focus on one thing without actually the other thing coming into their vision periphery. Let's look at just the restaurant listing page for now. Swiggy, in fact, has twice as much white space as compared to Zomato. It's very clear to see. When you click a restaurant, you get to the food listing, you can see that even on the inside, Swiggy's white space is actually twice as much as Zomato. In fact, Zomato is using a lot of space to write descriptions, etc., which Swiggy is not choosing to do, thereby resulting in more empty space. From a white space and a cognitive load standpoint, Swiggy is definitely providing a lot more of that element than Zomato. Okay, round 2. Let's compare both apps on this variable called discoverability, which is essentially how many options do you see upfront. If you compare the restaurant listing page side by side, you will notice that the number of cards you see on Swiggy are twice as much than compared to Zomato. You see about 3.5 cards on Swiggy right above the fold compared to Zomato showing 1.75 cards. So I think that's a very clear distinction of who's showing how many options more upfront and who's doing better in terms of discoverability. Round 3, let's compare both apps on this variable called desirability. There are 2 aspects that I think will make this variable more tangible rather than something very fuzzy. And one variable is image size. Especially on food delivery apps where you can't smell the food, you can't taste the food, the one thing that actually makes all the difference to make the food feel more desirable is how big is the image. So the second variable is who has more images, image quantity. Who's doing a better job of providing me more imagery of the restaurant, of the food? Is it Swiggy or Zomato? Let's look at image size first. If you compare, again, the screen that matters the most, restaurant listing page. Zomato actually has a 2.5x bigger image for a restaurant compared to Swiggy. It's a surprising difference if you really, think about it, how much that difference in size creates an increase in desirability. If you click into the restaurant, the size of the food and the different dishes is pretty much the same. And when you click into a particular food, the detail is also the same. But the difference at the beginning in the restaurant listing page is quite big. So from a desirability standpoint, when it comes to image size, Zomato is leveraging that factor in a way better way than Swiggy is. Let's talk about image quantity now. On the surface, it might seem both are actually displaying one image each for a restaurant, even though the size of the image on Zomato is bigger. But Zomato, it actually has this auto scroll of images, about 10 per restaurant, that actually creates a much more higher desirability quotient on its app compared to what Swiggy is doing. Round 4, And this is the last round. Let's talk about a variable called immersion. Which app makes you feel that you're closer to the restaurant and closer to the food? There could be many variables that lead to immersion, but the one variable that actually makes a big difference is usage of video. Both apps use video. Swiggy has a widget called Suggestions by Top Foodies, and Zomato has a section called Innovation Showcase. And if you compare just these two widgets, I think Zomato uses a much larger footprint of videos. When you go inside on Zomato, each restaurant's opening fold, about 55 to 60% of the page is just different video reels. And these reels are actually very well shot, great production quality. They actually show you how the food is being prepared, makes you feel closer to the restaurant, stimulates appetite. Whereas on the Swiggy side, it's just a header with the name of the restaurant and a few other details. The very stark difference on this particular factor actually when you compare them side to side. So in terms of immersion, I think Zomato is doing a way better job in leveraging video than Swiggy is. So 4 rounds are done. Let's look at the scorecard. From a cognitive load perspective, Swiggy definitely had the edge. From a discoverability perspective, again, Swiggy had the edge. But from a desirability and immersion perspective, I think Zomato definitely won those rounds. You might say, well, it's an even-Steven kind of score. But there's a very clear difference in strategy here. Swiggy has a very clear strategy around ease and functionality. Zomato has a very different strategy focusing on desirability and immersion. So which strategy is better? Which one actually is going to be more beneficial in the market in a hyper-competitive food delivery ecosystem? To answer that question, let's actually go back 7 to 8 years very quickly and see the evolution of how these app interfaces changed. If you look at Swiggy 2016 and you look at the app, how it looked then, how it looked in 2020 and how it looked in 2024, you will see a very clear, consistent thread of strategy focusing on white space, more number of options up front, and that strategy hasn't changed in the last 7 to 8 years. They've been consistent with that. If you look at Zomato, they started out looking actually a lot like Swiggy with the same number of options up front, smaller images, but something prompted them to change their strategy in 2020, where they completely went more focused on desirability, bigger image sizes, and that strategy has stayed the same till today. So a very distinct change for Zomato, but for Swiggy, the same strategy. We've looked at all the 4 variables, we looked at the evolution. Does it make any business difference? And maybe that'll tell us which strategy is better. If you look at the market share for Swiggy versus Zomato, back in 2019, 5 years ago, Swiggy's market share was 55% and Zomato's was 45%. 5 years later today, Zomato's market share is 58%, whereas Swiggy's is 42%. The whole picture has completely flipped. And if you look at how Zomato started eating into Swiggy's market share, they started doing that in around the 2020 year mark. Now, is it just a coincidence that they started eating into Swiggy's market share just when they changed the digital experience strategy? Just when they started focusing on bigger images and more desirability? I don't think it's a coincidence. And I think the business results make an interesting case for Zomato's digital experience strategy versus Swiggy's. What's your opinion of which experience strategy works? I think the best way to answer that question is if you were somebody looking to start a food delivery business today and you were looking to build an app, which strategy would you mimic? Which one do you think will give you a better chance of business success? Zomato's focused on desirability or Swiggy's focused on functionality? I think it's an interesting question to think about, and I think it'll be important for any new entrant in this space to learn from the lessons that we have learned from these two and this digital strategy showdown. At the end of the day, the point is when all other things are equal in a competitive market space, when both have good servers and clean code and the performance is fine and the service qualities are very, very similar, the small interface differences and changes in strategy when it comes to digital experience makes all the difference, and even a slight advantage can be a game changer. So it looks like, for now, Zomato's strategy is giving them a slight edge, and they have won this round. But I believe that the food delivery battle is far from over. Only time will tell how their strategies will evolve from here. See you next time on Digital Strategy Showdown.